Hi, Ben.
Hey,
Thanks for being here.
of course.
Okay, I'm super excited to have you. I have lots of questions for you. I'm going to give you a little introduction and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself also. So, welcome Ben Mathis. Ben has been in the world of acting for more than 25 years as an actor, teacher, and producer. He's the founder of Crash Acting, an acting studio based in LA where he teaches multiple nights a week. He's also the founder of Urban Confessional, a free listening project, a vocal coach, certified in Fitzmaurice voice work, and the author of best-selling book You the Career, a guide for actors as they navigate their paths in the business. So Ben, how did you come to be all of these things? How did you come to open an acting studio in LA?
Well, I first started teaching acting when I was probably too young to be doing it, 19 or something. And I was teaching in Athens, Georgia, and I really enjoyed that type of exploration and that type of work. And so then I left there. I went to a conservatory. I left the conservatory early, was on a TV show in New York, and I was acting in New York, and I was teaching at places in New York. And I was also the ultimate Frisbee coach at Columbia University, very important role in my life. And then I left New York and got my master's degree in California and was then certified as a Fitzmaurice voice work teacher after a few years working with Catherine Fitzmaurice, and then was teaching in universities and in studios around Los Angeles. And I just didn't want to work in a university, so I started my own thing in 2009, and that's how it happened. That's how it happened. Yeah.
How did you know that you wanted to start your own thing?
Well, I think this is going to sound awful, but when you teach for other people, they make you teach what they want you to teach. And I just didn't do that very well because I was like, this is too interesting. There's too much stuff going on. There's too much to explore. I can't do it in the confines of a traditional university setting where they have to teach a curriculum and a rubric and you have a semester to do it. And I thought this is too much. There's too much going on. There's too much I'm interested in. And the only way for me to actually um, explore this work the way I wanted to is to start my own thing. So that's why I did it.
Mm-hmm. And one of the ways you talk about the way you teach is that it's a non-dominant approach. Can you say a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so traditionally, acting is taught the way I would describe it, very top down. In other words, very often, in fact, I used to work at a studio where the owner of the studio had a mural of himself on the wall. It's not an exaggeration. There was literally a painting of him on the wall. It was very strange, but that's not unusual. I mean, there's very top down. A lot of studios are organized. A lot of acting classes, like many other types of classes, are organized pyramidically, I suppose I'll call it that, hierarchically, where there's like a master class you work to the top of. And I was always bothered by this. I was always bothered by actors who thought they were better than other actors, actors who saw themselves above other actors, producers who saw themselves above directors, just the entire pyramid structure I'm interested in deconstructing. And so acting is often taught kind of in one way or derivative of one way. And that's how I was taught in graduate and undergraduate school. And they just kind of cram it down your throat. And it's like, it's been like that for 120 years. Nobody's reevaluated really what we're doing. It's all kind of stem from the same place. And so I have always been interested in approaching it very differently. And so that's kind of what I was doing in my studio and in the classes I was teaching. And finally, somebody asked, I have to describe this somehow. And so the best language I could find was to say, well, really what I'm trying to do is use view acting differently so that the actor may access different parts of themselves in doing it. And to me, a non-dominant approach, an approach that doesn't impose the will of the artist onto the art, seemed to be the best way to both guide the actor into a sense of their own self, but also into a sense of real sharing and communion with creativity. And I find that by dominating anything, we can only make something subordinate to us. And a lot of actors, in my experience, were dominating or trying to dominate creativity, be like changing the current of the Mississippi with a spoon, but we tried anyway. And so that led to a lot of frustration, that led to a lot of ego, a lot of comparison, a lot of doubt. And it seemed that everything that blocks creativity comes from a dominant posture. And we posture ourselves in a posture of receptivity and non-dominance, we discover a different relationship to power. And so I thought that would be an interesting description for the way we're trying to encourage actors to work.
So it sounds like it's that dominance comes through in multiple ways. It's teachers dominating students, students dominating each other, actors dominating characters and creativity in a lot of ways that acting is taught.
Yeah, I think so. And probably this is just people. We're just doing the best we can, and many of us are scared. And so, one way to feel safe is to make sure we're in control of everything, and that's a form of dominance, of course. But I offer this example the most, and it's very helpful to me. And as you know, I have a 1-year-old baby, but anyway, I've had babies in my life, and you may have heard me give this analogy, but it really codifies it all for me. If anybody were to see a baby in the street walking towards the road where there are busy cars driving by, you'd probably run into the middle of traffic to save the life of the baby. You don't even have to know the baby to have even offered your life on behalf of the baby's life. It would be a reasonable thing to do. And here, this baby can't do anything. It's completely useless in accordance with society here. They don't pay taxes. They don't have a job. All the ways that we measure our benefit to society, babies do none of it. They can't feed themselves. They're entirely dependent on others and completely powerless. And yet, as I mentioned, we'd be more than willing impulsively to run into traffic to save the life of a baby. And so there is a power in the infant, I find, and that is the power of non-dominance, a power that would easily offer anyone the opportunity to sacrifice their own life to save the life of the baby. And that would be reasonable. And yet the baby can't do anything of value for society, not traditionally anyway. And so I see that. What is that? What is that? That was interesting to me. How is this powerless thing commanding so much power over us or with us or through us? This is a non-dominant application of power. And for the actor to access within themselves the very open-faced, vulnerable posture of what we would say is an infant's posture is to discover a vastly different relationship to power than the dominant, top-down, the imposition of one's will. That type of power just tends to create conflict. And so I'm more powerful than you. You think you're more powerful than me. And so we fight. And we see it happening all over the world, of course. I just saw a poster that said, peace through strength. And I understand that there is a role and a position of dominance in the world. And I understand that at times it is an appropriate relationship to power. Dominance is a great way to control, to destroy, and to maintain status quo. It's not a great way to create something new. I have found. And I think history will validate that, at least I hope. And so, as it comes to the creative arts, which is only interested ever in creating anything new, it didn't seem like dominance was the appropriate path. It just seemed like it leads to a lot of suffering and a lot of weight on one's shoulder and a whole lot of comparison and doubt and fighting and defending and all these, you're wasting our time. Creativity is not limited in the way that we think everything else is. So, there's nothing, in fact, to be dominant with, to find the posture of non-dominance as signified in the posture of an infant is, I believe, the correct posture to creativity. That was a lot, but anyway, I hope it's helpful.
So as you're saying, I feel like this is much bigger than just acting. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you. This is a podcast where I interview healers.
Mm.
So it started with body workers and then it got broader from there. To me, healers and teachers are basically the same thing. And there are things about your approach. I've been studying at your school for about 6 months now, and there's a lot that I take from your style, not just about acting, but as somebody in a healing role. And I think this non-dominant aspect is really important, and that's one of the things about your work that really resonates for me. So I want to talk a little bit more about something that is really related, which is like listening and receptivity, which also
Mm.
is very core in your work, and that I've seen just like thematically across different things you do, teaching, writing, free listening. So maybe why don't you start talking about free listening, say a little bit about what that is, and then maybe just more generally, like why is listening and receptivity, why are they so core to your work?
Wow, that's really a great question. That's a wonderful question. Well, free listening started when I needed healing, really is what it was. And I was going through a very awful divorce, and free listening was a pathway I found to begin to kind of put the pieces back together in myself. really is why it started. And I had always been interested in how serving others is, of course, a pathway to healing and serving ourselves. And around this time, 2012, I was meeting with lots of actors one on one, and it seemed as if many of them were depressed in all the ways that we can be depressed. You know, some of them just down, some of them depressed clinically, and others just in a funk, you know, all of the ways that we can. And inevitably, we would talk, and I would end up asking them, are you serving anybody in your life? Are you doing anything for others without the expectation of return? You know, basically, is what I was asking. And inevitably, the answer was no. And it seemed as if there was a correlation between one's general sense of depression and one's um, isolation when it comes to service. So I was interested in two paths. I was interested in incorporating acts of service into an actor's process to see if it deepened the humanity of the actor, which then allowed them to deepen the humanity of the characters they were bringing to life. I thought that would be interesting. And then I too needed it from a very personal point of view. I needed healing. I needed help. And so, literally, what happened was that one day I was crossing the street to go to class. I was in North Hollywood in Los Angeles, crossing the street. And there was a guy walking the street. He asked me for some money. I said I did not have any. I didn't. But I said I'd be willing to pray with him. And I'd never done that before, ever. I'm not a street preacher or street prayer, but that would be interesting, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be an interesting free prayer would be a very interesting thing. Who knows who'd come to you? But we did, we just kind of prayed together. It wasn't a particularly religious prayer. It was just kind of a prayer of well-being. And I'd never done it with a stranger. And it was a deeply vulnerable experience. And all the while, there's cars at the stop sign, at the stoplight, and the hand is ticking down. And I've got to cross the street. So we wrap things up. We kind of look at each other. And I walk across the street and I thought, oh my gosh, this was the most powerful experience I've had in a long time. There was something internal that shifted in me. And I thought, this is healing. This is what is the closest thing to free prayer I could offer? I thought free listening might be the closest. So I went up to my class that night, literally, and said, listen, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to go to the subway. I'm going to hold a sign that says free listening. And anybody want to join, you're welcome to. And people did. People from class joined. The actors from class joined. Now, it works for acting because traditionally listening, excuse me, is taught in acting classes, but it's just so prescribed. Listening just becomes another thing you do, not a posture you take. And so people hate listening exercises, and you're often told you're not listening. So I thought, let's get into the streets. Let's actually listen to others and see what shifts it makes on the actors who are doing it. Now, these were two parallel tracks. Part of me was interested in it as a quality of acting. The other part of me was in desperate need of healing. So I would spend almost 4 hours a day free listening to people, probably for a year or two. It was crazy. And slowly you could feel the kind of shattered threads of my heart being woven back together. And part of it had to do with the quality of presence I was maintaining, but a great deal of it had to do with offering myself freely to others and then having that be received and then having them then offer themselves freely to me. There's perhaps nothing more healing than being in the community, the communal presence of another person, really, for me, it was anyway. And so things started to shift for me personally. And about 3 or 4 years into doing it, people started to notice. We were just at the same place, just actors from class. And then people started to notice, and then people started to write about it, and then people wanted to join. And then the movement went viral in 2016 and 17. And then now we have volunteers all over the world. And I noticed, as it took off and it took a life of its own, I noticed that the actors who regularly listened to strangers on the street were decidedly different than the actors who were not doing it. And so I recognized also in myself that I had become decidedly different than who I had used to be, because perhaps I was learning not only to listen to others, but to begin to listen to myself. And I saw that often listening precedes creation in some way. And so it was also a very creative time in my life. It was a very present time in my life and a very fruitful time in my life. That all began with listening. Really, it began with listening.
So how do you bring what you learned in the free listening project into your style of teaching?
Well, oh, that's a good question. So I would say that listening in and of itself is a non-dominant experience, non-dominant experience. There's this phrase that goes around active listening, active listening gets taught a lot. And that it drives me crazy, active listening, but not that it's bad or anything. People just doing the best they can to describe something, but it seems so transactional, active listening. And then it looks so fake. When you're with somebody who's actively listening to you, it's like they're looking at you, nodding your head, saying your name a lot. And it's just like, oh, this is creepy feeling. It's as if you're using listening to get something from me. I don't want anything to do with it. And so what I was discovering is that there's an internal posture that the artist can cultivate. This is the same internal posture of the listener. And the way I would describe it, as you know, in classes, the posture of least resistance, as you prepare to receive. I find that if we can prepare the body to receive by assuming what I would call the posture of least resistance, which is an internal posture, then the effort of the actor, the effort of the teacher is less to do with what am I going to tell you that I'm so clever that you'll think I'm amazing, and more, what is it I will receive from you so that I might actually offer you the thing you come to look for. And the thing that kind of uh, well, even precedes that is this, and I do mean it. Before you can listen, you must love. And so when a stranger, anybody comes up, there must be a sense that by virtue of your inherent worth, I love who you are, and therefore then I can hear you. In fact, one of my favorite quotes is by a guy named David Alsberg. He says, being heard is so close to being loved, most people can't tell the difference. And one of the things I teach teachers in our teacher training is that you're not qualified to critique an actor till you first love them. Not love them sentimentally, or see, you say the words and people get all sorts of, what are you talking about? Because we have such a skewed idea of what love really means. But you're watching a scene in class and anybody can point out what they think is wrong with it. The paradigm of the teacher is to see it lovingly, because only by gazing at something you love lovingly will it ever reveal its true essence to you. And many people gaze at acting transactionally, like they want to get something, like they want to use acting to get somewhere else. We gaze at other people like we want to use them to get somewhere else. But listening requires that we gaze lovingly at the object of our affection, or at least the object of our appreciation. And in doing so, the thing we are gazing at can reveal its true nature to you. It's the same in relationship between two people. I mean, if I ever felt that somebody was looking at me like they wanted something from me, I would trust them less. I wouldn't reveal to them who I am. But when you can assume the posture of least resistance, in other words, allow the person in front of you to reveal themselves if they will, when they will, how they will, then what we're doing is cultivating an experience wherein somebody may reveal the one thing that they came to reveal. And the teacher's job is to receive that one thing and then offer something back in accordance. And so it begins with the loving gaze of the teacher, which is the same space that listening begins. And I'm saying loving gaze, and I do that visually, of course, but in one's presence. So it's not just visual. I don't mean to suggest that you have to be able to see somebody in order to do that, but to experience them in your body. You might say to hold the space for them, perhaps. And so that I learned through free listening on the streets. A stranger comes up to you. How do you not judge them? They tell you horrible things. How do you not judge them? Only by a deep and profound investigation of who you are can you maintain that loving gaze instead of cultivating a judgmental gaze. Because when you're listening, you don't need anything from the person. It's very nice. It's very nice not to need something from somebody else and to just experience them for who they are without need to change or modify or get something from them. Oh man, it creates all kinds of freedom. It really does. And so from a teaching point of view, that's the idea. But also from an acting point of view, that's the idea.
So is there anything more you could say about how you kind of like internally align yourself in that paradigm of the loving gaze, or like what you would do if it's not feeling there for some reason?
Yeah, of course, of course, of course. Well, it's not easy. It takes practice. And I do mean this. So in the great chain of being, they would describe it this way, but I'll suggest that there's truth to this. Well, even as we're talking, somebody could be listening, say, well, I can look at another person lovingly. That's hard to do. It's very hard to look at another person with a loving gaze because our relationship to that phrase, even love, is like, well, I'm going to look at you, love, and that means I've got to be romantically in love with you or attracted to you. We're just people and we're messy together, all of us. And so we get confused. And so occasionally, many of us have been on the receiving end of a cracked mirror. And so people saw us, but they didn't see us clearly. And then they made us to believe that we are not as clear as they, or excuse me, they made us to believe that we are as cracked as they perceive us to be. And so the whole thing gets messy. You jump into with a person, and we can play with that mess in a class and a guided experience, and we can learn things from it and things come up. But let me suggest, if you're really interested in practicing that there's a better way to work towards it. And so I do mean it when I say that first, the person should begin, anybody should begin by seeing inanimate objects lovingly. Really. And to go see a rock. What a crazy thing to say. To gaze at a rock lovingly. And in gazing at the rock, you might discover this rock is ancient and has been here for much longer than you and will be here much longer after you. That the rock is made up of, and then all of a sudden, in the midst of this loving gaze that I'm sharing with a rock on the street, I'm cultivating a sense of appreciation and understanding of the rock. I appreciate what it is I see. And then I come to understand it differently. And if I sit with the rock long enough, lovingly, then I can begin to experience that the rock is also returning a loving gaze to me. And now the rock is mirroring back to me things that I could only be told by a rock. And this is a strange even analogy. It sounds ridiculous. But if I'm sitting in front of a rock for long enough, I may just have a sense of my own strength. And if I sit lovingly in front of a rock and allow the rock to experience me lovingly, I know I'm projecting a fiction onto this inanimate object, but I might begin to experience what it means to be in a non-judgmental communion with an inanimate object, which is decidedly different to do than with a person. So if I can do it with an inanimate object, maybe a stick of wood even, I sit with the wood long enough until I can perceive the tree it came from, until I can perceive the seed of the person who planted the tree that the wood came from. All of a sudden now I'm, whoa, tripping. And then I might move to an animate object, a dog, a cat, a bird. And I look lovingly at the bird. This happened to me this morning. Oh my gosh, it happened to me. I said it last night. I came home the other night. We have a little archway coming up our walk, and I walked right into a spider web's nest. And it's like, I love spiders. I'm all for spiders, but we have boundaries. I'm not trying to have spiders crawling through my hair. I mean, I love you, but anyway, stay in your lane. And so I'm freaking out like there's a spider in my hair. She wasn't. I looked back, she was still up there. I was like, this is great. Well, this morning I walked with the same thing. And as I'm walking through, I ducked real quick, thinking maybe the spider's still there. I look up and she's still there. Now, the thing for me is this. I can perceive this spider as a deep inconvenience to my walking down my own stairs. That would not be a loving gaze. Or I can pause for just a second and I can endeavor to see the spider lovingly. Now, granted, the spider is not crawling through my hair. It's much easier to do. And I'm watching her and she's above me. And I'm thinking, I'm so grateful that you're up there catching all the bugs that would otherwise be in my way. And then I thought, I hope a bird doesn't get you today. And I'll probably see her again tonight. And I walked past her this morning and I said, listen, it's time to shut up. It's time to close down for the day because they come out at night. It's time to close down for the day. I ducked and I walked in and I thought maybe she appreciated me not walking through her web. Maybe she noticed. Wouldn't that be nice? I don't know if this is true, but it sure affected my morning differently than if I thought, get out of my way. And so by gazing at the inanimate object, I've prepared myself now to see lovingly the animate and living object. And then if I'm very good, I might begin to work my way towards being able to see people like that if I'm very good. And it's hard to do, and it's a practice. And in free listening, to gentle my gaze as anyone walks up to me so that I might be able to receive their story is to posture myself in a different place than if I were to be inconvenienced by them telling me the things they needed to say. So the posture I must assume in order to serve others without expectation of return, I found to be the posture that invites creativity most to thrive within me.
Hmm.
So building up to holding that for a person, because as well as I do, of course, very well, we're terribly complicated. It's very difficult for us excuse me, very difficult for us to be in the presence of one another without all of the complications of life getting in the way. We have to practice.
Can you say a little more about preparing the body to receive and what you mean about that posture of least resistance?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's very good. It's very good. So I mentioned ultimate frisbee a little while ago. It's something I've been doing my whole life, playing ultimate frisbee. And in ultimate frisbee, if anybody's aware of the game, there's a thing called spirit of the game because ultimate frisbee is entirely self-refereed. And spirit of the game is another way to say like sportsmanship or something. And so, we work out our differences on the field and there's no referees and there's a spirit of the game. In the spirit of the game, at the end of the game, excuse me, the one team both teams, excuse me, cheer for the other team. So let's say, Jane, that your team beat my team and we have a good time. At the end, our teams separate. We come up with a cheer, and usually the cheer is completely ridiculous and totally silly and occasionally involves alcohol. So it's just a completely ridiculous thing. And so what we would do, Jane, we'd come up with a cheer, and it's going to be clever. Jane, Jane, you're the best, blah, 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 whatever it is, right? But before we give you the cheer, we'll yell over to your side of the field and we'll say, prepare to receive. And that's your cue to turn around and receive the cheer we're going to offer you. And I find that to be such a profound thing. Will you prepare to receive what we're going to give? Because in reception, this is a deeply intimate experience. Reception is deeply intimate. And so, in the context of Ultimate Frisbee, it's very fun, it's very silly, but there's real wisdom there. And I find that if we can prepare the body to receive, then we commune with creativity very differently. Creativity is not something that works for us. Creativity is not our assistant. Creativity is not something where we impose our will to get what we want. Creativity is something we receive, much like listening is an act of reception, which is why active listening is an interesting thing. And so if we prepare the body to receive, then I find that listening is a much different exercise. It's not just something that happens with the ears. And the way that I encourage people to prepare to receive is to feel the support underneath them through their feet or hips, soften their heart, smile behind their eyes. And so the body is secure and stable, the heart is softened, and the mind is opened. And so preparing to receive is not an ideal condition. It's not like, okay, I'm there. It's just, where are you today? And can you prepare your current state to receive? A lot of people are looking for something, but until you're willing to receive it, God forbid you find it. You see, because you'll see it and it'll go away again. So if you're looking for something, then prepare your body to receive, and you'll likely find the very thing you were looking for.
This
Anyway,
is
that's where it comes from.
this is another way that I sort of feel the non-dominance in your approach is like showing up exactly as you are. I think this is something that surprised me coming from like being new to acting, having this idea about what acting was, and then realizing that it's like not so much going for a specific thing and just showing up. I really, really feel this in your class every time I'm there. Like, you know, bringing that into my own practice is like however I am showing up that day is fine and right and like can be used in service of the character. And there's something in that that feels to me very non-dominant in terms of like managing my internal state.
Yeah, you're so good at that too, by the way. Every time you've acted, you seem really truthfully just to begin exactly where you are. And the important part of that for the artist is not that the character is always exactly where you are on the day, but it's to understand that the character is as fully human as the actor playing them. And if something is living in me today as the actor, and we have to be careful, it's more complex than the way I'm describing it, as you know. I mean, I'm not suggesting that if you were in traffic, you pretend like you're still in traffic. It's a physical thing. I was in traffic and I'm feeling all kind of, my heart's racing, whatever. How does that belong in the humanity of the character? Because if it exists in the body of the actor, it belongs in the experience of the character. We have to figure out how. We have to figure out what that process looks like. And so there is a skill and a craft involved in that. But the root philosophy really truly is, if the character is as fully human as you, then begin in the fullness of your own humanity. That's the most beautiful thing you could do. Jane, you're very good at it. But you come from such an experience in your life, and you come from so many varying disciplines that you really do have a very strong sense of who you are. And you bring that really completely into the work that you've been doing. I mean, my goodness, for you to be in a death doula space into acting, it's not unlike free listening into acting. You've been holding a more profound space for others than acting. And so to take the quality of that presence into your work as an artist is to really bring something new to the table in the discipline and tradition of acting. So I'm happy you brought that up, because I do, it takes a lot of, oh my God, it takes so much pressure off. I don't have to be an actor. I just have to work to be me. Not easy to do, but does take a lot of pressure off. It's easier to
Um,
be something you already are than figure out something you should be that you don't think you are.
yeah, and I think like secretly this is true everywhere in life is like it's okay to show up as you are, but it's not often the message we are getting. And I think that like by practicing it in this practice and in this space that you've made at Crash, it's like helping me just bring that to everything, you know?
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, I would hate it. And this we do this. We all do it. I mean, bless our hearts. We're just doing the best we can. But people go to work every day, you know. There's these people who go to work every day, and they go to work. They go to the office, and they can't wait for the weekend, and they can't wait to get home. And so much about that is to do with who they are at the office versus who they are at home. And they go to work and they put on an entirely different persona than they do when they go home. And so there's the work you and the home you. And there's tests that reveal this. A lot of companies will do personality tests to measure the degree to which you feel you have to be different than who you are at work. Because if you feel you have to be fundamentally different, I understand the etiquette can be different and we may dress differently or what have you, but if you have to be fundamentally different than who you are at home when you are at work, then you will exhaust yourself at work and ultimately underperform. And so if the person is comfortable fundamentally being who they are at home is the same person fundamentally they are at work, then what we find is that the person is generally happier, generally more productive at work and more productive at home, tends to be more complete in their relationships, both at home and at work. And so when I know you at work and I see you at home, the only differences are maybe the way you dress. And of course, you know, everybody behaves a little differently because the rules are different, but fundamentally you're the same person. And I find that's true with actors. If you don't have to change who you are to be who you're trying to become, you'll do this for longer and be happier doing it. And so anyway, you're really picking up on something there. And I find that it transcends the discipline of acting for sure.
I love when you were talking about listening that you mentioned it being like not just about hearing people, not just looking at your actors. It's like a very full-bodied thing. I really find this in the spaces I work as well. Like when I started body work, I was like, whoa, I can listen with my hands and pick up a lot of information.
Oh, yes,
So
yes.
I teach workshops sometimes called listening touch. And then I also realized that I could do it. I was picking up a lot, not just through my hands while doing body work, for example. And so I went into energy work where I'm not even touching people and feeling like I'm doing a really similar type of listening. Sometimes when I sit in class, if I have an angle on it, sometimes I like will look over and watch you watching the scene to see what it looks like. What like there's something where I can really see that you're not in your eyes that much. At least that's my perception of it. Is like to me it looks very full bodied what you are
Hmm.
doing when you are taking in your actors performing. Um, I'm curious. I know it's hard to describe some of these things. It's hard to put words to them, but I'm curious what the experience is like for you as you are watching your students perform and getting ready to the way that it's formatted. A scene will be performed. You will then go on stage with those actors, sit with them. They will talk a little bit about what the experience was like for them, and then there will be some teaching feedback, that kind of thing. So as you are watching a scene, taking it in, receiving it, and also preparing to go do some listening and teaching with those actors, what is that experience like for you?
Well, that's a great question. And this thing about listening touch is a very important place to begin. Um, the first time I realized I could listen with my hands, like you've described here, um, maybe it wasn't the first time, but it was one of the more profound times. See, in voice work is a lot of body and breath work and things. And so touch can be involved. Some teachers like to incorporate touch, others do it differently. But I was always prone to touching people in these sessions because I could literally feel where the tension was in my body. Could feel my hands, could feel something's up here. In fact, for a good portion of the first part of my career after grad school, anyway, and after my certification, seriously, I would do a lot of private work. I would go to people's houses and I would do private voice work or what have you. And I would do that for several years. And I would show up to people's house and I have clients, kind of like a personal trainer, but I would be showing up and doing body work and voice work and breath work with them. And over time, literally, I probably had 10 or 15 clients that I would see weekly. And over time, this is a strange thing to say. I don't know if I've ever said it really publicly anyway. Over time, many of these sessions just turned into, Ben, will you touch me? Which in the kind of healing world and the body work world is not an unusual request necessarily, but I was like, oh, yeah, 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 yeah. And it made sense to me. I wasn't taken back by it at all because it seemed as if the touch was the thing affecting the body and the breath. And I could feel in people's bodies. I'm sure you can too. You feel in people's bodies where something was. Okay. Well, anyway, this was happening. And my brother, who's in Atlanta, Georgia, my brother's a Marine and he does 4 kids. He's got, he's a businessman. He's a million different things. But he started saying, touch me, give me a massage, just something like that. And I mean, he would start saying it. And then he would start telling my family, y'all, it's different when he does it. It's not just like a massage. And he would literally, and it's like my brother, and I'm touching and experiencing his body and the tension and combat trauma in it. And so then, and it's because it's my brother, we're kind of laughing about it. And it's kind of like, ha, 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 but I'm going, whoa, this is real. And he knows it is, and so then he would start telling other family members, oh, you got to get him to, and it was always kind of tongue in cheek, but serious. And so then so it'd be at Thanksgiving, and there'd be people lined up, and I'd be just touching them. I'm not a masseuse or anything. Okay. Then it kind of peaked. A stepmother of mine died in 2011, maybe something like this, of cancer. And I was with her. I wasn't with her when she died, but we were all together, my brother, my stepmother, all these people. And my brother Adam says, says to her, her name was Mickey, was her name. Yeah, he says, you should let Benjamin touch you. And she was like, what? He said, I think you should just let him touch you. And I was like, okay. So she comes and she sits down and I just start touching her. And I'd never felt anything like it, ever. Her whole body was riddled with cancer and I could feel it. And as I was feeling it, of course, my body's changing. Anytime I'm touching somebody, my body starts to change. It's almost as if whatever it is now moving into me and I'm breathing it out. And so this was happening. And it was a profound experience. I never touched somebody who was really riddled with cancer. And it felt good to her. It felt good to her. And if I could feel it, it's profound, very different than touching anybody else. Very different. And so then I was like, oh my goodness. So I called my teacher, Catherine Fitzmaurice. I said, listen, this is happening. She said, well, of course it's happening. Because presence is not just an idea. Presence is an experience. And I can offer a deepening presence through touch, through sight, through sound, through being next to. It's the quality of presence that's being offered. And if you'll offer that level of attention to anything, you'll hear it say something to you, if by hear literally or otherwise. And so this is what I'm trying to offer when I'm watching actors or other people. I'm listening with my ears, I'm watching with my eyes, I'm absorbing with my mind, but I'm experiencing with my presence. And so sometimes these things all agree. Sometimes what I hear, what I see, and what I'm experiencing are right in alignment and things are very clear. Sometimes it's not, and I have to listen to other voices inside of me saying, what's going on over here? I may not even know. I said, why is Jane? What is that? What is going on? And then I listen to what you say because you're in your own autonomy. I do find that it's important never to teach before you've listened. To do so is patronizing. And so never to teach before I've listened and never to teach before there's a question. And so I'm listening deeply for what question you may literally ask or what question may be implicit. And in that listening, it involves, as you've said, many different aspects of reception. And the body receives, the mind receives, the heart receives, the ears receive, the senses receive. And so what I'm actively listening for is what question do you have? What question do you have you don't know you have, but are asking anyway? And how can I guide you into the discovery of a solution or at least the next question? Because to teach before there's a question is completely patronizing. And so I never do. That's why the actor speaks first before I do. So I
Yes.
don't know if that answered your question, but all of these things seems connected to me. And you brought up listening with your hands. Very powerful work.
Yeah, so that's why you like to have people do a recall immediately after performing before teaching. Yeah.
Yeah, could you imagine if I got up and told you what to do? You'd be like, well, I didn't have that question. Well, I told you that answer. Like, what is that? I get up and I tell you the answer is 4. And you're like, but my question was, what's 1 + 1? But okay, 4, fine. I'll do something with. See, that would be a dominant approach to teaching.
Right.
I give you something before you've recognized you need it. That's absurd. That's about me. That's my ego. Look how clever I am.
So you find that when somebody is putting up a scene, for example, which something that you say in classes a lot is just when we perform for each other, we're just rehearsing a process. So when somebody rehearses their process, You find that there tends to be like a central question that they're in at that point?
Well, I hope so. I do hope so. And this is, it takes a second. It can take a second. Last night we got to one actor's kind of main question. I said, I told this actor, she's very experienced. I told her she's very good, she's very experienced. I didn't know why you were in class, why she was in class. I was like, what are we going to do together? I mean, I can help. I can give little tips and, I can help, but it's like, what's the real question that you've come to the room with? I find this is the relationship between any student and teacher in any discipline, that hopefully the student is burdened by a question, they're seeking guidance. And it's not necessarily a question that can be answered. And usually it's not a question that can be answered. And so we carry the question around with us. We try to live that question in some way. And that inevitably guides us towards a teacher. And if you approach any teacher with the question that your heart is consumed with, then the teacher can actually teach. But it's nothing to do with the quality of the teacher themselves. It's to do with the sincerity of the question you're willing to ask. And that happened again last night. There was an actor in class who asked a question, seemed to really have been burdening her for a while. See, that's when the teaching's actually taking place. Everything else is just like tips about acting. It's important. It's not unimportant, but the real teaching happens the same in my life when I have brought my questions to somebody. And the best thing the teacher can do, I find, is not answer the question, but point you in the direction of your own solutions, or at least your own questions, to validate that the question exists and to remind you that by virtue of the sincerity of that question, you already have the very thing you're looking for. But usually the teacher knows that and the student's not ready to hear it. So the student, myself included, when I'm in that posture, the student has to stumble around until they're willing to recognize the thing the teacher's telling them, which is you had it to begin with. In fact, you had it, and proof of you having it is that you found the teacher. You see, this all gets very kind of mystical.
Yeah, I think when I showed up at like to audit the class and start, like, I kind of expected you to be giving direct notes and like, well, when you're on camera, it'll be better to do this. And like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
what I want you to do with that one line. And then I was like, oh, this is so interesting. There's something very shamanic happening here. And like the teaching, it seems like it's happening many layers down. Can you give an example for people listening of like what some of those questions might be, whether they're a direct question a student might ask you, or whether it's you're kind of sussing out, like, I think this is this person's question?
Yeah, that's really good. Well, there were some pretty big questions this week that people asked directly. And you always know that it's a big question because they will either indicate or you have sense that they've been sitting on it for a long time. And so at some point, the sincerity of the question has met their willingness to ask it. And this is a big moment for anybody. And so this is a moment the teacher must really honor because in this moment, it's very intimate and I have to be very careful what I say and how I say it. But it happened a few times. So in Sunday night, or maybe it was Sunday, I can't quite remember. An actor who's very good and who works very hard has come into the realization, not by my assistance, but by others, has come into the realization that he's addicted to his work and he's addicted to the effort of working in a very profound way. It's not enough to say he's a workaholic. He tends to um, uh, give his ability to work the authority to name who he is. So if he worked hard, he is good. If he hasn't worked hard, he is not good. And of course, this brings up all sorts of complications for somebody because they see the effort of creation as the effort of creation. They only know one way to make something, and that's to work harder than everybody else. And while that certainly is a virtue, it also, of course, as you know, has a shadow side to it. So he asked a question. Basically, the question was, how do you achieve anything by not working? So he's asking about the very nature of non-action, as our Buddhist friends would say. And so he's asking about the very nature of how does work not materialize as effort? Another way to ask it is, how do you let go? How do you let go? And I know that I've worked hard at some things that didn't come true because I was working so hard at them. And the minute I surrendered and went, okay, whatever, it all came to be. I mean, this is a mystery. I don't know. This is a big question. And so the first thing that I told the actor is, well, I can't answer this for you because if I do, it'll just give you one more thing to do. And that's where you pride yourself because we all have a little checklist in our hearts and we tend to measure ourselves based on how well we measure up. And so that was the first thing I had to say is this is not a question that can possibly be answered. I can give you some context around it. I wrote a book that addresses it, but this is not a question that can be answered by way of information, because if I tell you what I think, you might just assume that's one more thing you got to do. And now you've got to let go of the very thing I told you. So that's where we began. And it went on for about an hour, the discussion of the question, because I was able to hopefully establish that first, then establish a sense of contentment and peace as a driving desire, then establish the difference between wanting and desiring. And then we talked about the nature of ambition and where he may be getting stuck. But it's got to be rooted on the question is the response to the question is rooted in that there is no appropriate response to the question. And you must come to terms with that. And if you come to terms with the fact that there's no appropriate response, then you might just begin to release your grip on your identity being centered in your work ethic. But this is not my work to do. Look at my little dog. This is not my work to do. It's only my work to reflect back. And my job is this, to meet the sincerity of the question with the sincerity of my response. That's it. That's Goldie. 7 pounds of terror is what this is.
That's funny. I have a 140-pound dog under my desk.
140-pound dog? That's bigger than you.
Yeah, she's part Dane.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
It kind of, that like grappling with that central question kind of sounds remarkably similar to our characters having a central problem.
Yeah, that's right. We talked about that yesterday, didn't we? We did. Yes. And I don't know how, it does seem anyway, that for at least periods of our lives, if we're really interested and introspective, that we probably realize we're being driven by a central question. And if growth, let's imagine that growth is a giant hill that we have to dig into. The shovel are questions. And so the questions we have are the shovel to our own discovery. And so the more we sit with a question, the more we find that the questions that matter are not questions we can answer, but only questions we can live. And in the living of those questions, we may discover and therefore then create something new.
I want to ask you about tension. So, yeah, I mentioned that like when this podcast started, I mainly had body workers on, and the first question I would ask everybody is, what do you think tension is? Because it's a word that body workers use constantly, and it's often like actually not that defined, and the way people use it tends to not be that technical and physiological. So I think it's really interesting to hear how body workers relate to it. I actually didn't know that you had this sort of touch background, but just
Yeah.
it's obvious, like we are working with the body so much in the acting world, like it's obviously very relevant to acting too. And I'm curious, like I'm not asking you for a dictionary definition, I'm asking what is your sort of personal way of relating to tension in the body, what that means.
Well, that's a really great question. And it is something that I have asked before. Because in voice and breath work, which is a form of body work, there's a lot of focus on releasing tension. You hear that a lot. And anytime I was taught something, bless my heart, I would always be like, I'm not cynical, but I'm skeptical. That's probably healthy. But I understood there was tension, and I understood it felt good to release it. I do know this. But I also understood that tension is very necessary. And if we demonize tension, then it will solidify, of course. And the minute I say I'm going to get rid of your tension is the minute you're going to hold on to it and say, don't take what's mine. So it can be very tricky. And so tension, the way that I understand tension, the way I've seen it released and the way I've understood it in my body, the first thing I'm going to do is recognize that tension is the natural result of living in a world that's complicated. And so tension are ways that we protect ourselves, perhaps. Tension can also be, of course, the remnants of a traumatic experience as solidified in the fibers of the muscle. So you get in a car wreck and you do like this, and a great deal of it releases, but microscopic fibers in the muscles do not release. The chemical that initiated that tension remains. And so that can be released in touch and massage. And you see people crying or laughing and they don't know why. And so there can be a physiological release of a literal tension, if by tension, the tightening of a fiber or a muscle, often caused by a chemical release in the brain at a moment of traumatic experience. And so when that chemical is re-released into the body, it is associated then with the moment that put it there, and we have a release, or we have a recall of some sort. And so tension released can release also the experience of that tension, excuse me, the experience that caused the tension in the body. Tension in that way, then I suppose, is a physical experience, is physical expression of an actual lived experience. And so the tension in your shoulders that's habitual or that is under the surface could be literally the body's memory of an event. Now, there are people who speak way more intelligently about that than me, but I've seen it and I believe there's truth to it. Other forms of tension, though, can be quite helpful to us. Of course, we need tension to resist gravity and to exist. And so the more nuanced we're willing to be around the nature of tension in one's body, I think the freer the person feels to release what it is they feel is theirs. And let's be honest, I mean, some of us are addicted to the traumatic tension in our body, and we do not want to let it go because many of us feel we're defined by the things that have happened to us. And if you take that from my body, then I don't know who I am. And so in the release of tension, we have to be very careful. We can't, I have found that a person will not release anything they're not necessarily willing to release. I can't make you release anything because you're holding on to it. Something in you perceives that this is beneficial to hold on to. And so if we demonize it, then we're teaching the person that they're holding on to bad things. Why are you doing that? You're so stupid. But if we glorify it, we don't give them the opportunity to release it. We can enable their addiction to it. And so it's a very gentle approach to tension in the body that both honors its presence and equips the person, empowers the person to release it should they choose to do so. But tension not chosen to be released, or tension that is not willingly released, and willingly release, the willing release of tension can be because I showed up for the session, I showed up for the massage. I mean, it doesn't have to be like, here it is, and I'm consciously letting it go. Um, I find touch is helpful in releasing tension, but it's not necessary. You can have dialogues with your body. You can find a place of tension and you can ask your body to surrender. Surrender again. You can breathe into that space, which of course physiologically increases the blood flow in that space. You can use heat, which does the same thing, or cold, of course, it's just the opposite. But and so there's many ways to help the body feel better. And sometimes releasing tension is a way to do that. But as you've brought up too, tension is a multifaceted word, and we have to be careful using it because we could just be like, you should let your shoulders go. You got so much tension in your shoulders. Why is that there? I mean, and we say those things, and sometimes anecdotally, it's just fine. It's like, oh my gosh, relax. But subtly speaking, if the teacher says you have tension in your shoulders, the teacher, the healer, whoever, if I just say you have tension in your shoulders, what the person may hear is, oh my God, I'm not good at releasing. You don't like me. I'm no good at this. It's just one more thing I'm not good at. I mean, that's not what's being, and so in this way, the healer, the teacher must always remember that what somebody hears is more important than what you say. Always. And so it's the same with tension. And we brought that up last night in terms of directing, that what they hear is more important than what you say. And so if I just say, release your tension, you're going, the fuck are you talking about? Anyway, that was a great question. I just kind of spoke. I don't know what I said or if that was helpful.
It is helpful. I really like what you're saying about not pushing people to release it. Like, this is a really big pet peeve I have in the bodywork world, that I feel like this is where I see a lot of dominance in the bodywork world, is trying to force tension out of people's bodies without
Yeah.
really deeply listening to the body and what it's, not just like why the tension is there, but like what's happening in a more zoomed out way, that the body has this whole intricate complex process, and maybe it's just not time for that specific tension yet. Um so with acting, like, if I'm gonna go on stage and I notice that like I'm feeling very tense in my chest, for example, we've talked a little bit about how it's okay to show up exactly as I am. I can try to work that into my character. One of the most interesting things I've found so far with acting and with your approach is it feels like dancing with tension,
Mm.
or like
Oh,
having this intricate play with it, where it's hard to describe, but it's like not trying to release it, but it's also not holding it. And I think that something that I'm really interested in when I meet various teachers is like cues that they give, like
mm,
pithy, powerful cues that are actually very helpful for their students. And one that you give often is soften.
soften. Yeah.
Yeah, and to me that strikes a really nice balance where it's not saying like relax, release all
Yeah,
your
yeah, that's the
don't
worst thing you can say to anybody. Yeah.
but it is asking for something in terms of like awareness of what's there and sort of letting it be seen, I guess, is another way of thinking
Mm.
about it or dancing with it or playing with it on stage or whatever. Um, yeah, I guess like what would you say to somebody who is performing or even just practicing by themselves their acting practice and like noticing tension in a specific part of their body?
Yeah, that was wonderful reflection there. Thank you. Um, the dance thing you're talking about is very profound, I think. In fact, there was a time when we called our process a dance. And I find that the dance is, I'm not really great at dancing, but anyway, when I see it, it's beautiful because you're seeing a relationship in a dance. A dance is a description of a relationship in so many ways. And it's a relationship that seems to be rooted in some form of reciprocity, where if I move this way, you follow, and if you move that way, I follow. And there seems to be the physical expression of a shared impulse between at least two people in a dance, or one person and themselves in a dance. And so I think this description that you're saying about one's relationship to tension in acting is a dance. And I think that's a great way to say it. To see it any other way is to either be dominated by my tension or to try and dominate my tension by being like, go away, you're no good, or I'm gonna ignore you. I'm in charge here. Or like you said, to surrender to the tension and be like, oh, that's being dominated by the tension. Neither one are going to be helpful. So the non-dominant approach would be to do as you're suggesting, to dance with it, to soften with it. And the reason I think softening is such a good reminder is because I'm not going to go to war with it and I'm not going to surrender to it either. I'm going to soften to it. And in other words, I'm going to give it the dignity of being heard as well. Tension sometimes arrives in the actor, before they go on, of course, as a response to some perceived conflict. The conflict of performing in front of others. Maybe there's a belief that this isn't going to be good, or I'm not going to be good, or there's a fear that they're like, all of the things that could happen. So the perceived conflict creates tension in the body that's protective. So I'm going to protect my heart, my chest is going to tighten. And in this, my body's doing its job, as you know, of course. And so if I soften to it, and I just tell myself to soften, I'm not telling myself to get rid of the tension. I'm not denying or invalidating the response of my body's response to this moment. I'm just saying soften to my own tension. I'm softening to the moment. And a softened body has a hard time resisting. A softened presence has a hard time fighting. And in that, I come to discover that if it exists, it belongs. And the minute my tension feels it belongs, it stops being so interruptive to me. In this way, tension is like a little kid who wants your attention. And you say, okay. And the kid goes, oh, cool. You saw me. Thank you. And then the kid's incorporated into the activity of the day. And tension in the body is a little like that. Anything you want to get rid of in your body should be included in your work instead. So the great artistic act is an act of inclusion, to take that which you seek to exclude and instead pause and say, actually, how can I include this? When we do that, tension, the nature of it at least, tends to shift. And now I can sound my tension, I can express my tension, I can speak my tension, as opposed to tension interrupting the expression I was trying to offer. So did I answer your question? But that's the principle behind it for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what I've been finding in my own performing and in watching my classmates is like, in terms of the healing side of this, I think there is something profoundly healing in softening in that way, letting the tension belong and be included, expressing from there or including it in the expression and having that seen and received by people watching. And
Yeah.
yeah, how powerful that is.
Yes, because then what it does, really, I believe this is true. It then, in ways we don't understand, but let's say an actor, let's say you go to the theater or anywhere, I suppose, a film, and you see an actor and you're particularly moved by their work and you don't know why. It doesn't even have to be like the hero. It could just be a single individual person with a line, or it could be the bad guy in the script. I don't know, but you're particularly moved by their work. And you know that you're moved by something because your body has shifted, your breath has shifted. And you don't necessarily know what it is that's caused this shift, but in recognizing it, you believe it to be true. In other words, you saw somebody do something beautiful, and in the recognition of that beauty, you've come to believe that what they did was true. And in the recognition of their truth, something has shifted in you because you know it to be true. And you don't know what it is. Now, perhaps, and I will make the case that it's likely that this person that you saw who was beautiful, who rang true, and therefore shifted you, it isn't necessarily how they're acting. It may be instead what they are speaking from. And when they give their tension voice, they give you permission to also give your tension voice. And though they're not instructing you, they're demonstrating by, or they're instructing by example, I suppose. But there's such beauty in the sounding of the body as it is, that that beauty often creates a sympathetic resonance for those willing to receive it. And so you may be moved by an actor and not even know why, but you come to understand that I'm moved by the actor because the beauty I see in them, I have no choice but to believe it's true. And therefore, I've now been given permission to re-relate to the very things in my body that previously I was trying to exclude.
Yeah, this feels like something that I was saying before, there's things I think that a lot of people not involved in acting have this perception maybe of what acting is, and then to get to step into this world, and I think a lot of people think you're like pretending as an actor, and I'm just finding it's the opposite. It's like feels like the most brutally honest thing I could
Yeah,
possibly
that's so good.
do,
That's so,
which I
yeah,
think is why I was
so
drawn
good.
to it because, but it's also just. It's like not one thing in your body can be lying. Like people will feel it, sense it. It's like it has to be such aligned expression.
It does. When I started dating my wife, she said, I don't like to date actors. I said, why not? She goes, because I can't tell when you're lying. I said, well, then you don't understand acting. You don't understand acting. But admittedly, I will say that I think I would have been taught not to incorporate my tension. I would have been taught, here's 10 ways to not do this. I would have been taught that acting is a form of pretend. And of course, it is a form of pretend. There's a fiction involved, but I'm not pretending. You see, and on one level, I don't mean to split hairs here. On one level, it's pretend, it's fiction. I'm playing. Of course, I'm playing. But there is deep truth in playing, and there's deep truth in fiction. And just because something's fictional does not mean it's true. In fact, often things are so true, only a fiction can tell it. And so to do that, the actor must be deeply aligned. There's no pretend here. There's no fake here. You don't fake it till you make it. You don't play at the character. You don't pretend to be the thing. Not at all. It in fact is quite the opposite, because we peddle in such truth. And so if you think acting is about pretending or lying or faking it, well, you just don't understand acting.
So what is it about acting for you? You've been doing this for so long. What keeps you like, yeah, why is this the art form that you decided to give your life to?
Um, well, okay. Let me start by saying this. I think any path anyone follows, right? It could be painting, acting, healing. It could be a form of religious practice. Doesn't matter. It could be science. Any practice that anyone engages in with every bit of their life, I think what we find is it takes us into kind of a perennial truth about all things. And so I think what I found with acting was that I was drawn to it at a very young age. I enjoyed it. I probably liked the attention or whatever it was. I enjoyed it. I wanted to do it. I thought I could do it. I had some inherent sense that I could do this. I'm in kindergarten, doing skits in school, and I played Santa Claus in fourth and fifth grade, right? This is a big deal. And so I've been bitten by the bug of acting. And then I did it middle school and high school. And then all of a sudden, it began, and I'll describe it this way. I'll describe it this way. There's four stages to this relationship. The first stage to my relationship with acting, I would say, is probably an ego stage. I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean I was doing it for me. I'm in kindergarten, and this is fun for me. So I did it. I was just following what I enjoyed. And it was about me. And, middle school, you want the role. It's an ego experience. And I don't mean ego in a bad way. I mean, it's satiating the boundaries of the self. The second development into this acting thing, I find to be a very communal experience. I'm in high school. These are my friends. I'm going because of the people. I'm making out with my girlfriend backstage. The communal experience of it all. It's like, these are my people. And this is an evolution. Now, the ego part of it is still involved. I've now included that into the communal experience. And so acting is a pathway into myself and others. And by the way, I'm good at it and I enjoy it. I'm being celebrated in it. And so then as I keep going, I find the third stage of that growth, we'll call it kind of an industry perspective, where all of a sudden I see that I'm connected to lots of people all around the world, and what we're doing can be quite important. That the art, the stories, the things, and the way that we're doing it in this discipline of acting can have a great impact in the world. And I'm realizing this at an industry level. I'm saying industry to suggest that others are involved, filmmakers, writers. I'm realizing that this is a larger piece of the puzzle, and if we work well together, we can have quite an impact in the world as it is. And so now a sense of a greater purpose is coming involved in my work as an actor. And now I'm realizing that the role of teacher is very important in the great industry of this entire thing. And I'm also beginning to find that this is fulfilling to me. And if I stick with it, I may get to this last stage, which I call the cosmic stage. In other words, by virtue of paying close and dedicated attention to acting, I'm shown truths about living. Well, now you got me. So it isn't that acting was so important to me. It's that acting was as a finger pointing towards the sun it was trying to send everybody to. Singing is like that. Healing is like, if anything you do, if done with a level of dedication, a posture of reception, takes you into the great truths that every other discipline is arriving to as well. And so what I've discovered is that I can arrive to great truths about living through the discipline of acting, where others have used other modalities to get to the same conclusions. And I would much rather spend my life teaching that than just teaching the kind of, the rather base, here's how you act, because that's not what's going on. Here's how you act is important. It's a skill. It's a thing. I hope everybody, I can teach that. I do teach that. I mean, it's important. But what it is I'm luring people into the shallows only for them to be tempted by the depths. And that's what happened to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks. Um, there's another aspect of your teaching that I've been really struck by that I want to ask you about. In some ways, it feels like it's separate from the teaching, but really crucial and adds so much to it. And that's, yeah, I think it's also very related to the format of our class. So it's a 4-hour long class. Maybe 5 or 6 scenes will be performed. And as I said, like in between each scene, you go up on stage with people. They do a recall, talk about what their experience was like, and then there's some teaching feedback, whatever. And then there's a little break, and then the next scene starts. And I've really noticed how the way that you kind of command the room and lead the room really like matters for the energy, in part because it's a long class.
Yeah, it's a long class.
If you're not really directing the energy intentionally, which is what I perceive you doing, I think that the energy can like fall off over the course of the night.
Yeah.
And people will be less engaged. I think even like feeds into the way that the scenes come out, because people feel that coming into their scenes. So I've been really struck by like a number of things that you do that I sense you doing as a way of sort of moving the energy or leading it. And this is interesting because it's sort of it's the other side of the listening piece. Kind of it's the leading piece. I'm curious I could say more about what I see you doing, but I'm curious what it's like for you. What are you doing to intentionally sort of steer the energy as you are teaching? You're interacting with your actors in front of a big audience. So it's different than if you were just with those 2 actors teaching to them, because you have to keep all of these other people sort of engaged, and you're also teaching for them, really. But like, what are the things that you're intentionally doing to steer the energy throughout the night?
Well, that's very perceptive. I teach teacher trainings. I teach teachers, and this is something we spend a great deal of time going over. Because in a lot of classrooms, a lot of acting classrooms, the teacher is directing and not teaching. And so what happens is, in a lot of classrooms, like I can't tell you how many, the teacher is confused about the difference between teaching, coaching, and directing. And those 3 things are very different. Directing is shaping the product, telling the actors what to do. It can make the scene better, but it rarely makes the actor better. Coaching is guiding the actor towards a result, and that can be helpful, but the actor may get the result and think it's because of the coach, and that creates codependency. I have enough of that in my life. I have a little dog. And so teaching is a decidedly different experience. Teaching is a decidedly different art form. And as much as I take acting seriously, the thing I take most seriously in my life is teaching. And so what you are seeing there is very perceptive because it's something I teach teachers how to do. Now, in the context of our classroom, we may have 20, 25 people in the classroom, but only 2 people are being spoken to directly. And so how do I take what we're talking to them, but make it apply to everybody while singularly being about them? If I become too immersed in our dialogue, I lose the room. If I stay too general in our dialogue, I lose you. And so it is a constant dance that I'm engaged in. So at the same time, it must be specific to you and yet universal enough so that everybody watching can apply it to their own work. So you're very right. I'm teaching the whole room, but I'm using you as the example. And hopefully I do what I call the umbrella technique. This is just something I've made up. And the umbrella is an image. I will start broad. And in the broad explanation of what we're going through, we may cover a principle, a philosophy, a theory, a process, or an idea around process that will apply to everybody. And I'm offering the philosophy of our discussion to everybody in a broad way. And I like to do that, as you know, through story, through analogy, through parable. And in the telling of a story or the development of a parable, the entire audience is receptive, and they make of it as they will. And they start to apply what I've said to their own process. And, oh, okay, that's interesting. But then I must distill philosophy into behavior or action. If all I give is the philosophy, you've nothing to do. But if all I give is the action, you won't know when to do it. And so it's like an umbrella. I start broad and I come down. And the more specific I am, the more it applies directly to you in the scene you just did. And so at the same time, I'm structuring my critique. I'm organizing the critique so that the entire room benefits, so that the entire room stays awake, stays present, so that the entire room applies it to their own work and grows by virtue of observation, and that you are given something singular to then go work on that will improve the depth of the scene and challenge your own process. Now, that singular thing I give to an actor, others may apply to their work as well. But that's the basic structure. And that's something I teach. That's something that I think a teacher must do very well, or they will lose the room. And still, it's 4 hours. At any given moment, like 20% of that room is actually paying attention to me. And I'm loud, and the teacher has to be dynamic. There has to be something, I believe, that the teacher is offering other than just the lesson, which could have just as well been written down and handed to everybody. So that structure is a purposeful structure that is in constant practice. I'm in constant practice with it. And I can feel it. I can feel when I'm becoming too myopic with the student. I can feel when I've not brought it back to the student. That's 4 hours a night, you know? Yeah. 4 hours a
Yeah.
night, 5 or 6 nights of the week. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you seem like you're having a lot of fun too. And I think that makes people have more fun.
Yes, I have to be how I want you to be. Like I have to model the things I'm teaching. So I have to be not only the standard bearer in the room, but I have to be the absolute model in everything I do down the line. I cannot teach something and then go behave in a different way. I can't do it. I won't do it, or I try not to do it. Of course, of course I do it. I mean, I'm a person, but the intention is to model exactly the things I'm teaching for the entirety of the night. And so, yes, you have to match my dedication. You have to match my commitment. You have to match my attention. You have to match my presence. You see, that's the idea. That's the idea.
Mhm. There's a, I would use the word fierceness to describe something I experienced from you. And I would say it's different. I'd say you're very like responsive to like what any given student needs. And it seems very sort of spontaneous and emergent. But there's often I feel this quality of sort of fierceness and very captive listening, really asking people a lot of questions, a lot of follow-up questions, and taking notes and things. But also, I feel like you balance that listening and receptivity with direction and like pushing, sometimes pushing things when they need pushing. And I'm really curious about that. Like, yeah, and so just for my own work as a healer, as a teacher, or whatever, like because it, in part because I don't see it modeled well very often. I know a lot of people who are incredibly receptive, amazing listeners, and they can't really lead and push. And then I know like more than enough of the opposite, but I can think of like a couple of people who I have found who like really balance those well, and I'm curious what you've done over the years
Mm.
to balance them and to know when to go in and when to do which, and yeah, when to push somebody.
That's a good question because I don't always know when to push somebody. I don't. And there have been times I've pushed people in a class and I felt like, oh, and I'll check in with them afterwards, like, you okay? But I think the key is something that actually we mentioned earlier, which is that before you critique, you have to love what you see. If you can love what you see, it covers a multitude of sins. It really does. And if you love what you see, then if I'm going to push or encourage somebody or challenge them, then I think it's a different thing than if I love who I am and therefore I challenge you. And so I've known teachers who just love to push because it makes them look powerful and in charge. And I've had students that look me straight in the face and they'll just be like, you can really challenge me. I want you to be hard on me. And I'm like, the irony in that instruction, you want me to be hard on you, and you want me to be what your version of hard is, which is actually a quite simple thing for you to handle. And so it is not, as Tara Brach, who's a wonderful Buddhist teacher, she says, it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the nurtured. And so for people who want to be pushed, actually, the challenge is for them to receive a nurturing intention. And for the people who can receive a nurturing intention, sometimes the challenge is to receive a direct intention. But both of those begin in the same place with I fundamentally love what I'm seeing. Therefore, then, I hope you know that what I'm saying is said not out of my benefit. I'm not trying to be right. I'm trying to be effective. And I think that that's key. Otherwise, I might push because I want to, because won't I look cool? Won't I look clever? Won't I look strong? Won't I look like, And so the very nature then of leadership, I think, really, I mean it. I've said before, I guess I'm the leader in the class, but not by virtue of my importance. I'm the leader in the class, but by virtue of my risk. Class doesn't go well, it's my life. You know, it's my risk I'm taking. So the leader assumes the risk, not the power. And that's a non-dominant approach. And so anyway, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, it is, and I do feel like you do take risks in the way that you teach, in the ways that you decide to push or not push and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But it makes a lot of sense to hear you talk about those risks being sort of grounded in that love and care and attention.
Yeah, hopefully. And I think that's important. I haven't connected that before until you've asked. Too many teachers do not love before they critique. So they're not taking risk. They're just inflicting risk, I guess, or something. It's seductive. It is seductive to be in front of people and have them looking to you for guidance. And it is seductive. And so I've done my best to weave non-dominance into all of it, lest I believe my own hype. Really. Because I'm just a person, absolutely subject to the whims of that temptation. To have 150 people a week look at me like I know what I'm doing could be very seductive if I did not actively practice a posture of non-dominance and reception. And so, yeah. I mean, I could get up there and just fling around my intelligence about acting or whatever, and you'd all think, very impressed. That'd be, my name's not on the door for a reason. I didn't name the studio after myself because I'm very well aware of how fragile my ego is and how seductive it can be to be in charge. And so to consciously weave efforts and practices of non-dominance, of reception, the posture of least resistance, free listening, these are things, frankly, that keep me humble enough to see the student in front of me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And it's a major reason why I picked your school and wanted to work with you. I think that my body is particularly sensitive, I think, to like force. And so I'm very interested in not just in my work, how can it be non-forceful, but how can we more broadly build systems like that. So I really appreciate you having this space that you've made in that model.
Well, I find this to be a very interesting discussion for leaders, and especially leaders who have the capacity to make great impact on people because of what they're leading, because of who they're leading, because of who they are. And when we're dealing in the space that you deal with, healers, any form of spiritual work or energetic work, any type of work that is deeply intimate, the person leading that work, you have to be so careful, because when you've impacted somebody's life, sometimes they look at you differently. And if you believe the way they're looking at you, your ability to impact them is compromised. And so I've come to understand in a different way the nature then, this is a strange thing to say, but I think it's very important. The nature of money then is very different. I've seen healers and spiritual leaders who charge exorbitant prices. And hey, get what you can get, but I can't separate that from the inflation of one's ego and the inability to see. I think this is why in many spiritual traditions, monks and friars take a vow of poverty. It's not because poverty is glorified, but because there's an inherent understanding of the dangers of that transaction. And in order to really serve somebody, to actually be there and to have a real impact and to lead them through a non-dominant posture, is to make sure that there is an alignment between what's given and what's received. And it's seductive. It's very seductive. And you have to be very careful. And I would say that anybody in a leadership position where there can be real impact, that it's helpful that even the pedagogy of what they teach itself should have in it checks and balances for the ego of the person who's teaching the work. And so I really, seriously, I mean, I just have so much fun doing it, so much play doing it. And I've worked very hard not to believe anything. And so I have people around me, if things are getting to my head, who'll let me know. So all of these things have been very intentional, because to me, I think perhaps the biggest thing that we're dealing with is the disruptive ego and the artist's ability to create. And so how we can navigate that, how we can maintain a healthy ego without an interruptive ego, and how we can implement that into the work as teachers, as healers, as artists, as actors, so that what we create is not only necessary, but pure for the world. Anyway, it's very interesting to me and something I'm very cognizant of, as you can tell.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels to me like people going into this kind of work should really be signing up for like a lifelong inquiry around that.
Oh my gosh, that is a great way to say it. If you're going into this work, I mean, really,
Yeah.
the work is cleaning toilets, metaphorically, literally maybe, but metaphorically, that's the work. There's nothing glorious about that kind of, if by glorious I mean the way we see it in Hollywood or whatever. It is a non-dominant thing. So we have to keep ourselves in check, and the sincerity with which we do that is usually proof that we're doing a good job.
You mentioned not having your name on the door. I've never heard you say, why is your studio called Crash?
Oh yeah, okay. Well, this is funny. A long time ago, 2008 maybe, I was teaching a class, and I was giving a talk, I guess, in the class. And I was giving an analogy of some sort, and about anyway, I was trying to motivate the actors, I think, probably. And I was talking about groups of animals. You call group of cows, a herd, you call a group of crows, a murder of crows, whatever it is, all these silly names we give. And I said, I start talking about rhinoceroses, and I'm giving this example. I'm saying, the thing about a rhino, rhinos remind me a lot of actors. I said, rhinos are interesting. I'm not like a rhinoceros guy, but anyway, I said, rhinos are very thick skinned. Okay. Their skin is like 2 or 3 inches thick. I said, also, a rhinoceros weighs a ton. They're huge, massive animals. They weigh a ton and they can run 35 miles an hour. So they're very fast. And so if you start thinking about a ton of mass moving at 35 miles an hour, that's a lot of momentum. And I said, but the thing about a rhino is they're mostly blind. They can only see 30 feet in front of them. So whatever is 31 feet better just move out of the way because this ton of mass is moving at 35 miles an hour and it cannot see you. So a group of rhinos is called a crash of rhinos. They crash into things. They're moving quickly. And so I'm giving this talk and I'm saying it's like actors. You're moving quickly. Whatever's in your way needs to move because here you come is kind of the analogy, right? Well, this was 2008 and people in the class, they liked the analogy. I thought it was clever. See, there's the ego. I thought it was clever. Right. And so they start calling themselves rhinos. And I'm like, oh God. I said, listen, it was just an analogy, everybody. I'm not like a rhino guy. I mean, I respect it. It's just an analogy. But they kept calling themselves rhinos. Then they created a Facebook page, rhinos. And it was just everybody in class, in this class. I'm like, oh my God. So then I go to start my own studio and I didn't have a name for it. It was a class to start with. And so they would call themselves rhinos in this class. I'm like, oh my God. Anyway, whatever. And it was cute. And then finally, probably in 2014 or something like this, it had been around for 5 or 6 years and it was time to like have a website and make something of it. And I'm like, well, what are we going to call it? And they were like, well, Ben Mathis Studio of Acting. I was like, then you don't know me at all. We're not naming this after me. And so we would think of names. There's no good names. And finally, somebody's like, Crash, Crash of Rhinos. And I was like, oh, Crash, this fucking rhino thing is following me around everywhere. So I said, fine, Crash Acting. That's what we did. And now people gift me rhinos. And I'm like, I'm not into rhinos. You'll see them around this. I'm like, I'm not into rhinos, but they gift me rhinos. Everybody gives me a rhinoceros. I'm like, I'm not, it was just an analogy, everybody. So that's where crash acting comes around. It is to imply the ethos and momentum of the artist. That's what it is.
That's so cute. I love that it came out of storytelling.
Yeah, it did. It came out of that. 2008, probably. I know where we were. I remember the room. Yep.
That's all I have. Is there anything else from what we've talked about that is coming up for you that you want to say before?
No, there's not. It's just something I've always enjoyed about you and your presence. I'm just fascinated by the world you live in, the work you do. And I'm so happy that you were able to see the kind of cohesiveness but in what we're doing in acting and what you're doing in your life. I just think people like you are such a gift to the world. I really do mean it because you're fundamentally dealing with things that so many of us, myself included, prefer to avoid. And you have such a gentle spirit and gentle presence. I can imagine the impact you have on the people you work with. So you brought that into your acting as well. I mean, what else are we looking for? It's really great.
Thank you, Ben. I really appreciate a lot of things about your work, but like the passion and the focus that I see you bring day after day. Yeah, just really in awe of the work you do. So thanks.
Thank you. That means a lot to hear from you. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Bye.
Bye.